All right, so I came across this video of Tim Pool. I watch Tim Pool every day. I watched a lot of his videos. I watch him. I watch Carl Kalinske. Always love Max Kaiser. I think Max Kaiser is the best analysis of the United States economy. I sometimes watch Joe Rogan. Every once in a while, I'll watch like the Young Turks, but most of the time I don't know. I don't get a lot out of it. Anyway, I watched this video with Tim Pool, like Tim Pool, and honestly, about 90% of what Tim Pool says, I totally agree with. But I have one tiny issue with a lot of stuff that Tim Pool talks about. And this goes back a long, long way. So I went to Occupy Wall Street back in, I don't even remember when Occupy Wall Street was, 2011. And to be honest, I was a little bit out of place because I was trying to get a lot of the reforms that had been from the Great Depression that had been overturned, and specifically the Glass-Steagall Act. I was marching with my little sign, and maybe you can see it in the ones in Seattle for Glass-Steagall. I think I was the only person there. And everybody was really confused by what I was talking about. I wanted to overturn the Securities Modernization Act of 2001, restore Glass-Steagall. I thought basically everybody was like, oh my gosh, the banks have messed up. Let's get this banking regulation in. We never should have gotten rid of this in the first place. But it wasn't really like that. It was more, there were a lot of people running around with like socialist, leftist, they didn't really know what to make of me. And I know Tim Pool got his start at Occupy Wall Street also, and I enjoy his work. Anyway, he comes up with these videos, and the latest thing that he's been talking about on his videos, he did this video about, it was about Nancy Pelosi and how she showed a stupid video about ice cream. She's obviously very, very wealthy. I mean, you could see from the video that Nancy Pelosi's got like no shortage of ice cream. She'll have ice cream for quite a while, should she so desire. And she's got a super nice house and like these fridges that probably cost as much as every car I've ever owned. But anyway, so he did this thing about Nancy Pelosi, and the Democrats have been blocking another round of funding for this Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. I don't know if that's what you call it, but the Paycheck Protection Program, which sounds great. We got to get money to small businesses. I'm all about that. I think that FDR would very much approve of that. But there is a giant, giant, giant caveat. And this is where it comes down to nuance. Much like Trump or Biden, there doesn't seem to be like a really great answer to this problem right now. But I really, really want it to be someone to address it. So the problem, as I see it, is, we have to do something to help people. There is no other option. And everybody knows that. We're going to have rent strikes and food lines. I mean, this is a mess. This is the Great Depression all over again. And not everybody, I myself am kind of a prepper, so I've been expecting this for a long time, but I certainly don't want the Great Depression or the new depression to last. And I want us to learn the lessons from the last depression too. And one of the lessons that we obviously have completely forgotten is financial banking reform. And the problem I had with this video was more that, let me just play a little piece of the video and I'll explain. Yeah, I'll explain the problem I have.
So we're hoping that we can come to an agreement. So, wait a minute. The Republicans said, can we get more money from this bill? So we have this bill for small business. Can you add money to that? And they said, what about the fire department? Well, okay, let's have that conversation. But for now, can we increase the funding?
So the issue that I have with this video is, the argument in this video that's being made is that the Republicans and the Democrats want to get money to small business, and which I'm sure they do. The problem is on the implementation of the last round, and we have to get money to small business. We just do. So the Paycheck Protection Program gave out $349 billion in low low interest forgivable loans in the last round. And I am having some trouble figuring out where that money went. Now, I checked out the Paycheck Protection Program. I went to their website. And in their website it said, use this form to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program with an eligible lender. Okay, the eligible lender, that, or at least the one at the top of the list, was Wells Fargo. So, and I don't know if you remember Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo was had opened up 1.5 million checking accounts and saving accounts and over 500,000 credit cards for customers that didn't ask them. They just basically were fraudulently opening up accounts. And it was a giant scandal. Elizabeth Warren, God bless her, called them out in front of Congress. There was a big, the CEO of Wells Fargo, I can't remember his name, was testifying. And she was doing a great job. And honestly, it was one of Elizabeth Warren's finest moments. It really was. And I hate saying that because Elizabeth Warren has kind of gotten silly with all of her, now she's like some kind of, I don't know, sexually harassed Native American activist. But there was a time when Elizabeth Warren was probably one of the best people in the country for real Wall Street reform. And she grilled that executive from Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo should not even be in business, let alone handing out money for the Paycheck Protection Program. And it wasn't just them. There was plenty of banks. The banks that were listed on that list were a who's who of people that caused all these financial problems. That was a mess. And I'm starting to question, too, about where the money actually went. So even, like, I knew this was going to happen. There was an article, I think it was USA Today, lawsuit alleges Wells Fargo unfairly shuffled Paycheck Protection Program applications to give money to large borrowers. So if I'm all for bailing out small businesses, and maybe this is just the price that we have to pay to put money in. But the problem is, I'm starting to question who these small businesses that the money is actually going to. One of the things that was really curious to me was the way they define small business. And I can't get it. There's not really any information. They're not listing specific businesses that they gave money to. And this is $349 billion. They burned through that money real fast. I know there's a lot of people in the United States and probably a lot of businesses applying. But, and I heard from multiple people that it was difficult to go through the loan application process. So those that had lawyers, I guess, were the ones, like if your law firm, if you had lawyers, you could get through the process quicker. And I looked it up. There was a lot of law firms that were out there advertising to hedge funds and private equity to help you get this money, which comes to another question. Hedge funds. So the way they're defining what a small business is, it's 500 or less individuals. Lots of hedge funds qualify for that, 500 or less individuals, because hedge funds don't want a big payroll because they're genius traders are where all the money's supposed to go. They don't need a huge payroll. So there were a bunch of lawyers, and I saw several. If you just Google hedge fund and Paycheck Protection Program, you're going to see what the same thing I saw. There's a lot of people that were out there advertising for, hey, I can get your hedge fund part of this money. And for those of you that don't know what a hedge fund is, I'm just going to tell you right now. Hedge funds are they're basically they're like an investment fund, and they're only made available to sophisticated or accredited investors, meaning you got a lot of money. They're available to rich people and cannot be offered or sold to the general public because you're too poor and don't understand it. As such, they generally avoid direct regulatory oversight, bypass license requirements applicable to investment companies, and operate with greater flexibility than mutual funds and other investment funds. In other words, what these guys, a lot of what those hedge funds are putting money into are are highly speculative, highly leveraged. I mean, back in the 2008 financial crisis, if you remember, collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, packages of mortgages, and then those packages were then uh, insured with credit default swaps. It was a mess of crap, and that was highly leveraged. That was really, really unstable, very dangerous, and it all blew up. Well, now they've got collateralized loan obligations in these hedge funds, and there's article after article. You can look it up all day long about how these hedge funds are investing in these extremely leveraged, um, uh, very dangerous CLOs. And there's been articles in the financial press for probably the last 2 years that when the CLOs blow up, it's going to be a big mess. Well, the hedge funds, at least as far as I could tell, uh, may have gotten some of this money. Well, who else got money? Private equity. Private equity they go in and they put money into these companies. And you've probably heard of private equity from the downfall of companies like Payless Shoes, Deadspin, Shopko, Radio Shack, and the most famous one was Toys R Us. And basically, they're all about short-term gains over. They're just basically pull money out of the company. They would say they're like turnaround experts, whatever. They have a long history of pulling a lot of money out of the company, loading the company up with debt. They buy companies basically to load them with debt and to pay themselves. And there's a lot of Bain Capital, Mitt Romney. So private equity also, I found a lot of articles where there were law firms that were advertising to or advising for how to get private equity to get some of this paycheck protection money. One of the top companies that got, or top sectors or type of companies that got some of this money were these big publicly traded chains, I guess you might say. And the problem with that is a lot of these guys were buying back their own stock in previous years. So basically, they were buying back the stock so that the stock price would increase, so the executives would basically get more money out of the company because the executives have a lot of options and so if the stock price goes up, they're going to make more money. But what it does is it creates a company that's not very liquid. It doesn't have a lot of savings. If anything happens, they can't pay for it. So basically what they did was during the good times, they borrowed this money and all the rest of this and took all the money in the company and used it to inflate the stock price. So the executives made great money when that stock price was inflated for themselves. Those stock buybacks were very lucrative for the executives. Conversely, when it's rough times, now there's nothing to fall back on. Now the company's in trouble. Now suddenly, suddenly we got junk bond status. It's not a good situation. So the question that I have is, this last round was $349 billion, and I mean, I'm sure this money was just printed out of thin air. So the next round is going to be $250 billion, and everybody's sounding like, oh, well, every time I hear the Republicans or even the Democrats speak about this stuff, it's like they're down there and they're going to help that barber and that guy that owns that little espresso stand and, that farmer. But I really question how much of that is actually happening. And in recent years, I mean, there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of things like I think for a while the Fed funds rate was less than 1%. So if Goldman Sachs or or if a bank went to borrow money, they were paid in order to borrow the money. Did your credit card interest rate go to negative 1%? Don't think so. Probably it's around 20, 25, 30%. Which is one of the major reasons that Americans have a lot of debt. There's this entire system of synthetic finance, derivatives, CLOs, CDOs, credit default swaps, this whole mess that basically acts as a private tax system. And my problem with these videos is I think they're framing this incorrectly. Like Tim Pool and several other people are talking about these small business, because that's the no one's going to go out there and say, yeah, we want to give this money to a hedge fund. Oh yeah, these guys just bought back all their stock last year. That they're phenomenally wealthy, and now the company's bankrupt. The executives did great, so let's give them a big bailout. Nobody's saying that. They're talking about, oh, we're going to help they can't get the money. Well, the problem I have with that is we have to get the money to small businesses. There's no question about that. But is this really being framed the right way? And I did a lot of research, and I could find out like what industries the money went to, and I could find out, but there's not like a listing of the companies that actually got the money. And I'm just curious as to how much of this money went to hedge funds and private equity and large publicly traded companies that bought back their own stock. Because we're going to have to remake the American financial system. We just are. There's no other option. If we want to survive this, we're going to have to remake the American financial system. And I honestly think a great place to start is with the laws from the Depression. Overturning the Securities Modernization Act, that would be top priority. We need to make stock buybacks illegal. I think stock buybacks were actually illegal up until the early 80s. I mean, we need a different economy. I don't know that if you throw money into a giant, privately held tax system, like the way the current U.S. economy runs, where it's being funneled through this matrix of financial institutions that are obviously a big part of the problem. I just don't know where that's actually going to end. So I want to say that I watch all these videos from Tim Pool, and there needs to be the Republicans don't really have an answer, and the Democrats don't. I don't think the Democrats have really even addressed this or really care about it. I mean, most of what I've heard from the Democrats are these, SJW type issues, but I don't really hear a lot from them about going after the hedge funds and all the rest of that. And unfortunately, and it breaks my heart to say this, I was a big fan of Elizabeth Warren. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau would have been outstanding. I learned more about how the financial system works from Elizabeth Warren than anyone else, and it just makes me so sad that through her presidential campaign, it just seemed like she was trying to play to the masses, trying to play, and I don't think that she thought her financial reforms were not a good enough issue anymore. And I feel like she lost kind of a lot of credibility, because these are really the times where we need something like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. When was the last time the SEC even did a prosecution? I mean, the last prosecutions that I can really think of from the SEC were, things like Enron and WorldCom and, Bernie Ebbers and Jeff Skilling. That was over 10 years ago. And we, much like what happened, in the New Deal, there was relief, recovery, and reform. Reform had a lot to do with reforming the financial system. And that's really what we need now. I mean, a base start that all these politicians should be looking at is, let's restore some of the financial regulations that were here during the New Deal. And I'm going to tell you this, eventually that stuff's going to happen anyway, because there's not another option. The economy, I don't think, is going to be able to heal itself. You're just not going to be able to print dollars to pave over everything. We're not going to we can't just hand money to these companies. We can't just hand infinite amounts of money to these companies. We've got to restore the financial system to something that is, to maybe what it was from the 40s through the 80s, where it was better regulated. And I just get worried when I see people like Tim Pool, who I have, by the way, have great respect for. But when this whole argument is, he's saying things about these loans going to small businesses, I'm like, hey, there's a big caveat in there. There's a giant caveat. please, if you don't mention how Wall Street is getting their fingers in all this stuff, then I don't think you're gonna like the results. Anyway, Tim Pool sees this. Best of luck. You got a good show. I like your show a lot. And I would please, one other thing, Tim Pool, if you see this, please interview Max Kaiser. I think you would learn a lot from Max Kaiser and vice versa. I really, really like Max Kaiser, and I think that would be a great interview for you.